Welcome to Rosie the Reviewer. We're your hosts. I'm Sam,
And I'm Marcia.
and we like World War II media, and we want to talk about it. Welcome back to Rosie the Reviewer. This week we have another special episode. We are lucky enough to have Terry Herfield with us, who was the crowd costume supervisor on season 2 of SAS Rogue Heroes. Welcome, Terry.
Hi.
So we will get right into it. We're really excited to have you on. We haven't talked to anyone who's done costumes before. We don't know very much about it. So I'm wondering if you can tell us what your job entails. What do you do as a crowd costume supervisor?
So my job is to dress and organise everyone who doesn't speak, basically. So any stunt performers, any extras or SAs, as we call them, supporting artists. Yeah, basically everybody who doesn't speak, people who ride horses, people who drive cars, which are all like separate teams. And yeah, stunt performers, anyone who's not the main cast falls under my remit. So that's my job, is to make sure that they're dressed correctly and that all the costumes are in the right place and all those kind of things.
It's so interesting to me because I feel like when we think about the production, everything that goes on behind the scenes of a TV show, there's just the more you think about it, the more kind of different little jobs there are, which is really cool. Can you tell us your background a little bit? How did you get into this?
I went back to university as a mature student when I was kind of in my late 20s and did a drama degree. I was intending on becoming a teacher. As part of my drama degree, I specialised in costume and didn't get the teaching role I wanted on my first year out of uni, and got some work experience in the theatre instead through my costume lecturer at uni, and kind of just went from there. So I ended up working in theatre for maybe 5 or 6 years, just doing theatre, and then I started doing little bits of TV and film, and I've now been doing TV and film full time for about 12 years. Went from being a trainee in TV and film to working as a standby on set, which is the person who looks after the actors and makes sure that continuity is right on all their costumes. And I've slowly worked my way up to being a supervisor. And sometimes I do crowd costume and sometimes I do principal, all within the supervisor umbrella.
Amazing. And what was the process like to get involved with SAS Rogue Heroes specifically?
So I had worked with Rachel Walsh, who's the designer, on a previous job called Bodies, which also had some 1940s sections in it. It had 4 different time periods.
Is that the one where there's like a murder or someone dies and it's
The same dead body in 4 different time periods.
Oh, I watched that too, and I just forgot it was called that.
Yeah, so I crowd supervised on that as well, and that was Rachel, the same designer
Yeah.
as Rogue Heroes. And there was obviously quite a big section of like 1940s in there as well, so we had some military uniforms and lots of like 1940s civilian wear too. Yeah, that was a really fun job. It was wild. Like trying to do 4 time periods was really hard. So I'd worked on that with Rachel, and when SAS Rogue Heroes came up, she asked if I would like to go, and I said, yes, please. This sounds amazing. So Rachel and her team had already done season 1 in Morocco the first year, which I think was a much bigger beast than they expected it to be. They were still in COVID times, so they had a minimal crew. They'd gone out to Morocco and been kind of quarantined in a hotel whilst they were filming. So it was a very different experience to the season that I did, but they'd kind of gone back to the production and said, we need more people next time. Like, this is a very big undertaking. And so I got brought on board for the second season, which was really fab.
So obviously you've done all kinds of different projects. How does this one compare or stand out?
I think one of the main things for this one is we just had such an incredible bond with everybody, partly because we started with 12 weeks in Croatia. So we did 4 weeks of prep in Croatia and then 8 weeks of filming. So everybody was kind of all staying in the same hotels, socialising together, eating together. And we just built an incredible bond with like members of the cast. And I know you had Ben on the other week. He has a team of guys who come on as like sort of special action extras, and they know how to use guns and all that kind of thing. And those boys we looked after like every day. So we just had such a great bond with them. And yeah, just kind of the fun side of it really was really excellent. And that helped it to stand out from other jobs, really.
Isn't Croatia amazing? I just went in October and just blew my mind.
It was absolutely stunning. We were like in a small area in the north of Croatia called Istria, and it was just beautiful. We did a little bit in Slovenia as well. Well, we were staying in Slovenia, but traveling across the border every day to work. But yeah, it was just brilliant, just absolutely incredible.
What's the logistics like in Croatia?
difficult, really difficult. So a lot of the costumes we get are hired, and normally on a job in the UK, you would hire mainly from hire houses in the UK, and they get things shipped to wherever you need them. That's very difficult the minute after Brexit to get things shipped from the UK into Europe and across to Croatia. So we had to hire from houses in Europe instead. So it meant going out to places like Madrid and Poland and various other places before we started filming to choose which costumes we'd like to hire that then got sent to us in Croatia. So it was, it made it a little bit more tricky. But yeah, the logistics of moving around the country, obviously we didn't know the country ourselves. So here we kind of go, I know how far that place is, how long that's going to take me. Or I know a man who's got a van who can come and pick the costumes up and take them for me, which you don't have because you're not in your home country sort of thing. So all those kind of logistics were tricky. But, it worked well in the end. It was just, the sort of getting used to not having your own sort of home comforts in that way.
Right. Would that then all be your responsibility to make sure that all the costumes are all delivered in the right place? Is that on you?
No, it's a bit of a team effort. So you have a costume designer who's the head of the department and who decides the look of the show and how that's going to work and how the costumes are going to look. And then there's a supervisor and then crowd supervisor and sometimes one or two assistant designers. We just had one on Rogue Heroes. And so the supervisor is sort of chief in charge of making sure that all those logistics happen. But I worked very closely with Peter Paul, who's the supervisor on Rogue Heroes, and we went to Madrid together and pulled those costumes and moved everything over. And so we kind of did that together. But yes, it's his responsibility, essentially.
So would these costumes already be like weathered and time period accurate, or would you need to do stuff to them before they can be used?
A mixture. We hire from an incredible hire house in Poland called Hero. They specialise in military wear. So right through the ages from sort of like medieval armour right up to, modern day warfare. But some of their stuff is old. Some of it might even be original. And some of it is much newer, and it all depends on how much we need as well. So if we're ordering more of a certain type of uniform than they have, then they'll make them for us. So then they would be brand new. And then in that case, we have a breakdown team who are part of the costume team as well, who would weather them and use various magical techniques to dye and break down and rough things up. And so that's a whole, I think on Rogues we had 3 people in that department, but that can be anything from 1 person to 15 people in a breakdown department who it's their job to kind of wreck everything, essentially.
Just break it.
Yeah. So they take cheese graters to things and blow torches and all sorts of techniques that they used to get things looking, suitably weathered.
Sounds like fun, actually. I would like to do that for sure.
Yeah, that is definitely a fun bit of the job.
Do you also have to dress people? Is that also within your responsibility?
Yeah, so every day that we're filming, we would dress whoever's on set that day, who's extras and stunt men and all those kind of roles. So that can be anything from, well, on Rogues, the minimum we ever had was sort of 8 people, but then it could go up to like 200. So obviously I wouldn't physically dress all of them myself, otherwise I'd have to be there at 3 a.m. But yeah, me and my team would dress everybody. And yeah, on the really busy days, we get extra people in who you probably won't see in the credits. But yeah, generally there was sort of, how many did I have on my team? 3 of us. And then we'd get extra people in when needed.
When extra wrangling is needed to wrangle all the extras.
Wrangling is an absolutely perfect term for it. Especially when it's all men, unfortunately, trying to get them all to get dressed correctly and put all their webbing on and all their bags and,
I believe that. I'm familiar with wrangling groups of men.
Yeah, it is. And obviously with Rogue Heroes, it is mostly men that were dressed in. We did a few scenes, the scenes in the Ritz and back in London and things that had women in, but the majority of the scenes were men. So it was generally a big room full of soldiers going, I don't know where my socks are.
Do you spend any time, I have this image of a costume department that you're always sewing, and I don't know if it's true. Are you sewing?
I very rarely sew now. unfortunately. Sorry to ruin your little image, but no, as a supervisor, I very rarely sew. I might do the odd repair if someone rips the bottom of their trousers, which happens a lot. I might do the odd repair, but I don't really sew. No, we tend to have a workroom that make things as on period dramas. So there's lots of little departments within the costume department. So you've got the workroom who do all the sewing and repairs and any kind of principal actor costumes that need making from scratch. And then you've got the crowd department, which is usually my department, and then you've got the breakdown team. So and then an on-set team as well. So you've got quite a few little departments going on.
So how many people would you think are in the costume department?
So on Rogues we had, hang on, 1, 2, 3, about 12 permanent crew, and then we would have extra people. And when we were in Croatia, we had a Croatian crew as well, and I think there were 8 people on the Croatian team. So I suppose that's like 20 really for most of the Croatian shoot. But yeah, it does vary on the size of the job and the budget of the job and kind of what's required. If you're doing a modern police drama, you need a lot less people than you do if you are doing a big 17th century period drama.
I saw you did Outlander as well, right?
I did do Outlander. That was a massive team on Outlander. It was huge.
Thought so.
Yeah, that's the biggest team I think I've ever worked with because they've just got the most incredible facilities there. Like the studio is set up just for Outlander, and they have a huge workroom with I think about 15 people in maybe just in the workroom, and then they have a full breakdown department, and they even have what they call a craft department, so they do any like hats and leather work and painted details on the clothes and all that kind of thing. So they do anything that's kind of not strictly sort of sewing. They do all the kind of additional bits. So yeah, Outlander is a very impressive costume team. And I think you're probably looking at maybe 40 people as the permanent team. And then when it's busy, they get more people in.
Right. So this is about half of that, if not less.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, much smaller.
I feel like the costume departments, as far as I'm aware, they all seem to be like this big family, and you all seem to work together quite often on different projects.
So generally it's the designer will get the job first, and then they'll bring a team with them. So they'll call on people they've worked with before who they like working with to do their next job. And sometimes that doesn't always line up. Sometimes you're already on another job and a designer you've worked with a lot will ring and say, do you want to come and do this job? And you're like, oh, well, I can't because I'm already working. And so teams do change a little bit sometimes, but generally, once you've got that kind of shorthand of working together, it's easier if it's a similar team again. So I've now done 3 jobs with Rachel because we work really well together, and that's been really helpful to just carry on and do another job with her.
What do you have to keep in mind when you're dressing for action scenes? Like, is there anything in particular when there's, stunts involved and that kind of stuff that you have to think about?
Particularly with stunts, we have to make sure that there's enough room under all the costumes for them to wear any extra padding that's required. And sometimes that means that the costume is too big for somebody. So it might be a size or 2 sizes too big so they can wear it all depends on what they need. Sometimes it can be like full body armor underneath, or sometimes it might just be knee pads and elbow pads, but even that you kind of have to take into consideration so that the sleeves or the legs aren't too tight so that you can fit everything in. And some stunts require more sort of rigging, or they might be on ropes, and they might need, so they'll have a harness on underneath the clothes, and then maybe we'll have to cut some holes in the back of like the shirt or the jacket so that some loops can come through and have like wires attached to the back of them. So we use that for things like if they were on like a high building. So the scenes in Rogues where David Sterling's coming down the outside of the building, even though in real life it wasn't really that high, he would still be rigged in that way so that it was like super safe, and then they would sort of VFX those wires out in post-production. So yeah, we have to think about that. And blood and things, obviously, with any kind of injuries. And sometimes they put squibs, like little explosive packs of blood inside their clothes, so that if they're shot, that will then explode out of the clothes.
Yeah,
which
I was
is quite
thinking,
fun.
like, surely sometimes they get damaged, right?
Absolutely. So if there's any kind of stunt, we would usually have three copies of that costume. That's kind of like the minimum to do a stunt, especially if it's going to be any kind of, if they're just sort of falling on a crash mat, it's kind of not too bad. But we would have, then they'd have the wires. So we'd have the one with the wires holes, a spare set just in case, and then what we call a hero set, which would be untouched. That would be kept perfect. And then, yeah, if it's going to be squibbed with blood or something like that, you might have 2 or 3 that are squibbed with blood, and then the hero one. You'd kind of keep one set perfect. And all the breakdown that we talked about before would have to be the same on all of them. So every little bit of dirt that's been put on them would have to be copied. So that would have to be, really carefully looked at. So we take hundreds of photos of things and be like, look, there's a little mark here and a little rip on this pocket. And so that they would all have to be the same.
My gosh, there were just so many moving pieces. I feel like on the second day, I'd be like, all right, I've lost like 3 of these costumes.
There's a whole big system, especially with crowd, but even with principals, everything gets labelled with usually the character name and number, because each actor's given a number, or each character's given a number, just so we can keep track of things a little bit more easily. And every item's labelled with then their name and number. And kept in a little section that's just their little wardrobe section with their kind of a name label at the front. And it's very hard when all the uniforms look the same, though. That is, On some period dramas, you're like, he's got the red jacket. That's fine. We know which one's his, but it's not the same on SAS because they're all the same.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we talked about Ben super briefly earlier, the military advisor, the berets, the uniforms. Obviously, people have a really strong feeling about, historical accuracy and that kind of stuff in World War II shows, period dramas, I guess, in general. Can you talk to us a bit about the uniforms and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so the uniforms are really tricky in that sense, in that we're very aware that, people are very attached to exactly how military uniforms look. And we work really closely with Ben to make sure that we've got them as accurate as possible. But sometimes something might happen, like during filming, like a beret gets squished or moved to the other side of their head, or and we're like, we've got to keep it like that of continuity, even though it's now not correct. It's like they've just shot that scene, so we're going to have to keep it like that for the rest of the scene, and we can't change it now. So we do have that, but we do a lot of research into how things look, how they were worn, like even down to kind of how people folded their sleeves up. They're all humans, even though they're soldiers and they're wearing the same uniform. So they all do it slightly differently. And I remember very early on in my career when I was working on Victoria, I had a designer who said to me, the thing about uniform is it never is. And I was like, what? And she was kind of like, it just never is uniform. Like unless they're on parade, it's never perfect. Like individual people will always do something individual with their uniform. And that's something that's kind of like stuck with me. And I think it's a lovely way of being able to see their characters as well. People do their own thing with their uniform. It kind of shows you who they are a little bit.
Yeah, that's kind of the nice thing with SAS too, is that the real guys were not really the types to like always have their seams straight and always have, the perfect uniform.
Yeah, exactly. Like you've got, what's the old Sterling called? His name's gone out of my head now.
Bill?
Yeah, Bill Sterling. So he's very, straight-laced and kind of uptight, and his uniform is pretty perfect most of the time. But then you've got, Paddy Mayne, who obviously, is rebelling against all kinds of authority. So his is much more relaxed and definitely has its own character. They've all got different character in their costumes in various ways, which is really interesting and really lovely to see how that develops throughout the show, because the actors also do their own research. They're like, especially the principal guys are very invested in like the characters of the people they're playing, and so they do their own. Sorry,
Bobby, who plays Kosha, right?
Yeah, Bobby especially. He even tracked down a badge, a medal that had been won by his character in real life, and we had a bit of a discussion with Ben over it, because he actually didn't get the medal until later, but Bobby really wanted to wear it, and so we had discussions about that. But,
I love that. That's kind of precious.
Yeah, it is really sweet, and it's really lovely, and it's all done with the best intentions.
And this season too, aside from the regular guys, we had the Italian partisans, like a little bit more going on in the background. Can you tell us about the challenges of kind of having, all these disparate groups? Is there any particular one that's kind of like the more fun to do?
The civilian stuff is often a little bit more fun to do because you get to sort of style things a bit more and add in, interesting colours and fabrics. And especially with a group like the partisans, you're sort of adding in things that they might have found or stolen or just kind of gathered along their way, along their journey. And you're sort of thinking about how they've got to where they are as well when you're looking at what they would wear. So it is a bit more fun because you get to play a bit more with colours and textures and things than the uniforms, I do really like doing uniforms because there's so many specific rules to it. You've got to do your research and you've got to kind of know what you're doing a little bit, which is really challenging and satisfying when you get it right.
What kind of research do you usually do for this kind of thing?
I usually do a bit of online. I usually try and find books on military stuff, and I do have quite a few. There's a handful of military history books, specific military uniform books that I use quite a bit. And then I also quite like to try and visit like museums and things. There's the War Museum in Manchester, which is not far from where I live. That's really useful just to kind of look at what was around, and that helps with looking at how they were damaged, what the wear and tear looks like on them and things like that, because that's really, really useful information when it comes to breaking things down.
Yeah, I bet there's stuff that you wouldn't think of. Like we spoke to an author a couple of weeks ago who was talking about how a lot of guys would get like M1 thumb, where like the catch on the rifle would like catch them on the thumb. And so like he's like, yeah, I wrote that into my book, but most people wouldn't think of that. And I bet there's tons of stuff like that, costumes where it's like you wouldn't even think that it would get damaged in this way.
Yeah, exactly. Like the buttons on the epaulets would often get pulled off by their backpacks. So those buttons would be like resewn on like hundreds of times. And so the fabric underneath would be worn and like damaged. And so things like that you don't really think about, you kind of think, oh, it's just a uniform. But like little things like that, especially to other soldiers, would be a tell that they've been doing it longer or they were brand new, or we kind of try and accommodate that when we're doing the costumes.
Yeah, I bet that would be different again for like guys in parachutes because that pulls on the fabric as well. So you get different kind of...
Yeah, exactly. And the guys in parachutes are quite often dropping and landing on their bums or on their knees. So they would get like grass stains or, be muddy in those areas, whereas maybe somebody else wouldn't be because that's not part of their role. It's knowing what that wear and tear looks like from real life, from like museum pieces that have actually been worn and used, and then transferring that knowledge onto costumes that we might have had made or that might be new or reproduction. But then, yeah, you do get to play a little bit more with the sort of civilian uniforms, and that tends to be a little bit more fun.
Yeah, you mentioned, some of the actors doing their own research. In terms of collaborating with other elements of the production team, directors, production designers, and that kind of stuff, how does that kind of stuff tend to go?
It's always collaborative. Like it has to be, really. Usually we get, again, depends on the job, but we have what we call tone meetings, which decide what the tone of the show is going to be. Is it going to be like dark and scary? Is it going to be, joyful and uplifting? And those meetings can be quite intense. So Rachel, the designer on Rogues, would take, mood boards and show the producers and the director and various other members of the team, and the production designer and makeup designer would also be there as well. And they'll all show what their designs look like, what they're thinking, and then they'll try and make sure it all comes together as a cohesive look for the show. Obviously, with Rogues, we're creating things that really happened in real life. So there's not a huge amount of wiggle room on what the uniforms look like because that's what they look like. But yeah, a lot of the civilian scenes and things like that, there would have been meetings about. And so those looks kind of come from a collaborative place in the first place. And then, yeah, as that sort of filters down, Rachel will then decide like maybe like a colour palette and a kind of scheme of work and what that will look like for everybody. And from my point of view as crowd supervisor, I'll then get a mood board, or I'll have lots of chats with Rachel anyway, or like, be a discussion between us. And then Peter and I go to the costume hire houses along with Poppy, our assistant designer, and pull costumes that fit that brief and that would work for people. Usually at that point, we don't know who is going to be wearing the costumes. So we're just pulling a huge stock of things that would work for a look. And then we'll pull out things that nicer or more interesting or whatever, and they'll go with principal actors, and then the rest go on the crowd.
I love that there are these artistic considerations, that you get to have some professional judgment on that. Because I mean, looking at the the crowd costumes look great on the show. And I feel like if one of the costumes didn't work, people would notice. But otherwise, like people don't really like super notice, right? Which I don't know. This is really like interesting to me.
Yeah, it is. It's really interesting. It all depends on the job, but very often it's like we don't want anyone to notice the crowd particularly. You know, you want to see them as a whole, but you don't want anyone to like ping out. You don't want anyone in a much brighter colour than anyone else, or anyone looking like they don't fit. So that's a big part of the job, is to make sure that everyone looks different to each other without looking so different that you're like your eyes drawn to them instead of watching the actors and the action that's actually happening.
Maybe on that note, a little bit, have there been any set mishaps while you were working on SAS?
I'm trying to think. I don't think there was anything major. I mean, there were a lot of ripped seams in the backs of trousers. There's a lot. I think because the army trousers they're a different shape to a modern trouser, and a lot of the guys wore them way too low on their hips, and they're kind of designed to be worn quite high up on the waist, and that gives you sort of an MC Hammer pant vibe with the crotch hanging real low, which is not the look we were going for at all. And then they'd go and lift a leg to jump on the back of a truck, and all of a sudden you've got someone running across that going, Terry, quick.
Oh my God. I love that they are old man pants, and these young dudes are like, I don't want to wear these like old man pants.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what it's like. And you just like, oh God, right, needle and thread. I've got, not from SAS Rogue Heroes, but from another job I did, I've got a picture somewhere of a guy laying on his front in a pair of like Victorian breeches, like laid on the grass with one of my team literally sewing the back seam of his pants up whilst he's laid on the floor, because it was just like, cameras rolling, we just need to get this fixed so he can get back on as quickly as possible.
And all these guys are like ripped as well, right? They're like super trained, so they've got lots of muscles.
Yes, lots of muscles, and sometimes muscles that a man in 1940s England wouldn't have, because they work out in different ways now. Like you see all the men on the kind of old footage, and you think they're like little wiry, kind of slightly underfed, whereas our guys were kind of been to the gym and looking a bit too hench, really. So yeah, they do tend to rip things in odd places.
Yeah, I'm just imagining the set full of guys, really. What's it like being on such a masculine set?
You definitely feel the testosterone. It's very, it does feel very man heavy, but not in a bad way. It's very good fun, but it's very loud and it's very high energy. They're a great bunch. They are a really good bunch, and I've been on other jobs. I did a job about football hooligans once, and that was testosterone fueled in a very different way. This was very fun on Rogues. There's a lot of camaraderie between the guys on set, the sort of specially trained extras and the actors. There's a lot of football games and frisbee games and all sorts of things that happen. I'm sure you've seen some of the photos from Theo and Bobby, and of them all playing frisbee on the unit base in the morning before they're getting ready to go to set. And it's really fun, but it's also really difficult to get them to do anything once they get set. We're doing a game. It's like, come on, you need to get dressed. They're like, no, sorry, we're playing frisbee. You're like, come on.
Boys, come on.
Yeah. But yeah, it does feel very testosterone fueled at times, but it's really good fun.
It seems like, and I get this from Ben as well, it seems like a very collaborative, everybody's got their head in the game, they all want to make this a great show. Like it does, you can tell. And even looking at your photos, they seem really fond of you too. So looks like a good time.
Yeah, there was a point where they decided Ben and I were mum and dad, because we were like the grown-ups. Because we'd be like, right, come on now, you need to get sorted. And they'd all be like, yeah, but we're just busy. And it's like, no, come on, let's get you all to set. And they were like, oh, you two like mum and dad. It was very fun. But yeah, Ben and I worked really closely together on that, so it was, we've got a good bond too, which is really nice.
Nice. Do you have any favourite memories from that?
I think the last day we did in Croatia, which was, I'm trying to think what it was the day with the donkey where they're all on the beach and Reg has found a donkey, and that was just, it was absolutely boiling that day. It was so hot and we had very little shade. With like there's a picture somewhere of all the boys hiding underneath a fig tree. There's just no shade, and everyone was so hot. And it was just a really fun bit of the day because they all had to run into the sea naked, and they all have to wear like a cock sock. They all have to wear something around their bits to be covered up. And as they all dived into the sea, a load of them just came off. So they were like these little like pink jellyfish floating about in the sea, and the boys were all like catching them and giving them to each other and be like, "This on Joe," and it was just really funny. But yeah, I think that day is probably my favourite memory from set.
Oh my God, you're just down the beach and one of these just like floats by. You're like, oh, what's
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. Little modesty pouches.
I have another question for you related to different kinds of productions. Maybe you could shed some light on it for me. Can you tell me if there's a difference depending on what studio you're working for? Like if you're doing a Netflix production or a BBC or something like Outlander, which is bigger, obviously.
There's always budgetary differences. The BBC tends to be not as high budget. Netflix can vary and the BBC can vary as well. Something like Outlander or a Marvel job or something like that, I've got what seems like endless pots of money. There's still a limited budget, but it's not nearly as restrictive. The BBC tends to be lower budget because obviously it's publicly funded, so it has that restriction on it. There is, I find, from a costume point of view, with Netflix jobs and things like that, there's a lot more involvement from the studio in terms of like the tone meetings that we talked about and things like that. They get more involved, and there seems to be more people involved in those conversations about how they want it to look, because obviously it's part of their brand as well. So it's not just the producers of that specific show. It's like Netflix want to have a say in what that looks like as well. We've just done a Doctor Who spin-off last year that hasn't come out yet. And that, again, because I think Disney were involved and the BBC, and obviously Doctor Who's a whole thing in itself. So the tone meetings for that were very intense because there was a lot of people to decide what they wanted it to look like and how it appears and what the final product looks like. So yeah, it does change it a little bit. Yeah.
I feel like with the show like Doctor Who, there's a lot of expectation as well. Like,
absolutely,
because people love it so much.
Yeah, there's a huge fan base, obviously, and a lot of pressure to produce something that pleases everybody, which is very difficult.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Do you find that the movie industry or the TV industry has changed a lot since streaming platforms have become a thing?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's more high quality work. There's like what we call high end TV, because I generally work in TV. I do occasionally do film, but it's usually TV. And I think sort of 10, 12 years ago when I first started, a lot of, especially where I live in the north of England, there was a lot of detective dramas and soap operas and things like that. And I think in recent years there's been more sort of high-end TV and like big period dramas. Peaky Blinders was filmed not too far away, and Victoria. There's been quite a lot of big sort of period dramas up here. Even things like the 688 came up here to film. And so there's been a lot more high-end drama coming here. And I think a lot of that comes via the streaming services like Netflix and things.
Interesting. I would have almost thought that because they push so hard on production, pushing out content so often, it might have been lower quality. But you're saying that you're getting the good bits from the streaming services?
Yeah, I think so. I think they have quite high production values. They want things to look a certain way and they want things to be higher quality. And that's kind of pushed everything up a little bit, because then the BBC, with Rogues, the BBC have then, that's gone to MGMs to be shown in America. So they're aware that their shows might end up on a streaming service as well, and have got to meet that kind of criteria. So I think it has it's changed it in that way, in that it's elevated lots of areas.
Well, so that's a good thing for you then. That's cool.
Yeah, that's great, yeah. It means I get to work on period dramas and come home on an evening. It's nice to be able to be home.
So what's next for you, Terry?
I actually don't know at the minute. I've just finished a job 2 weeks ago and I'm having a little break. Not a big break, and not intentionally, but just waiting to see what comes up. It gets very, very quiet in film and TV, especially in the UK between Christmas and March, because the weather's terrible and there's not a whole heap of daylight hours, and so filming's fairly rubbish at this time of year. So yeah, it's quiet. So I'm just waiting and seeing what comes up next. Yeah.
Hopefully season 3 at some point, right?
Yes, that is definitely on the horizon. Not quite yet, but sometime this year, I believe.
Fingers crossed.
It's crossed.
Yeah.
Do you have any dream job? Is there a project that you would love to work on? Or a show that you've seen that's just really cool that you'd be like, yes, I would like to work on that?
There's lots of things, I think, but I wish that I had worked on Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet. I think that would have been an incredible show to work on. I just love any kind of like period drama, but I really love like not the posh people, kind of like the working class people and the ones who are grubby and doing like strange jobs and have like interesting clothes that are like worn and dirty. And so anything that's kind of like, I'm trying to think what, like when you see things like Peaky Blinders where they're all quite like rough and ready and you've got that kind of element of just gritty dirtiness that you get to kind of play with. I find that more fun than the like posh satins and silks.
Have you seen Silo?
No, I haven't yet. No.
I think you'd like that too. It's futuristic, but everybody's been living underground for a long time, so it's very gritty.
Oh, yeah, that sounds good. That sounds up my street. It's funny because you sort of think that after doing this for like a long time that you wouldn't be in awe of it, but I still am. I'm still like, let me see what the other costume departments are doing. This is really interesting. Yeah.
Is there anything you want to briefly nerd out about your job that you never get to talk about, but you want people to know?
This is such a good question. I think my favourite thing about my job is that we get to go in like historical places that nobody else gets to go. So when we're doing period dramas and things, you get to go in like stately homes and like they always end up putting you in bits of it that nobody else has ever been to. But even on Rogues, we went in some like cellars in London that we filmed the prison in at the beginning when he's in prison in Cairo. And then like beautiful places like I think it's called the Palm House, where we filmed the bit where he's smashing up all the chairs at the very beginning of episode 1 of season 2. And we just, I think I do nerd out about the historical buildings we get to go into and we get to see, which is a sort of side bonus of the job, I think, which I don't think people would realise. But yeah, that's quite fun.
Oh, that would be me too. I'd be like obsessed.
Me too. I get really giddy. I'm like, we're in the servants' quarters and no one's been down here for years and this is very exciting. So I think that's one of my favourite bits of my job is getting to go to like really cool places.
Love that. So we usually ask people if they're reading or watching anything. Sometimes we ask people to recommend a World War II book or movie, but you don't have to. Are you reading or watching anything cool right now that you would recommend?
So I have been reading the SAS Rogue Heroes book by Ben McIntyre because I'm kind of thinking if season 3 does happen and I get to be lucky enough to go on it, I'd like to know what's going to happen. So that I've been reading that. What have I been watching? I've been watching a period drama called Dope Girls that started in the UK a couple of days ago. That's really good, but that's kind of interwar, so it's kind of just at the end of the First World War, and it's a female gang of drug dealers in London who work in like the clubland, which is really cool. I'm trying to think if there's anything else World War that I've been watching. I don't think there is at the minute, but
the SAS Rogue Heroes book is great, and I'm just thinking like costuming wise, like next season we're probably going to get French resistance fighters, and there's going to be way more guys getting killed and injured and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, there's all the kind of like traveling through France, going into Germany. It's all going to be very interesting. But as soon as I get the word that I'm definitely going on it, the research will start in earnest.
I love that. Gosh, you should write a book, Terry. I would read it.
Maybe one day. Maybe that'll be my retirement plan.
Well, Terry, we've had you for a while now, and I think we should let you go, but this was like the coolest thing ever. Thank you so much for being on.
Thank you. It's really fun to be able to just talk about my job for a bit. It's been really lovely to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Terry. And thanks, as always, for listening to Rosie the Reviewer. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. You can rate us 5 stars. You can send this episode to a friend. You can visit our website, rosieTheReviewer.com, or you can follow us on Instagram at Rosie the Reviewer Podcast.
Thank you. See you next week.
Bye.